Hello, everybody, and thank you all so much for joining us today and giving us an hour of your time. My name is Todd Knapp. I am the founder and CEO of Envision Technology Advisors, and today we're going to be talking about cybersecurity and the effect that this whole event with COVID has had on the security of our data and the security of our users, and actually the security of ourselves and our personal lives as well. So a little bit of housekeeping here before we really kick things off, and I introduce the nice folks that are on the screen with me. So first of all, if you find what we're talking about interesting, you can certainly follow my content on Facebook or on Twitter, and there's some easy links there for you to get to us. You certainly could email me as well. We talk on all manner of technology and business topics pretty much year-round. At one point in time, I was doing that at live events, not so much anymore. So as you'll see later on, we have a full spate of webinars coming up and other events coming up that I'll talk to you about. Second thing in the housekeeping side is that we want to hear from you. So as you guys are, listening to the conversation, I encourage you to please use the chat window. If you look on your toolbar in the GoToMeeting, you will see a really nice little chat area where you can type things in, pop the questions in there. Jeremy Gerard is actually on this call. He's our marketing director. Unmute yourself and say hi, Jeremy.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining.
So he's the mystery voice that's going to appear out of thin air every now and again to make sure that the three of us notice the questions that you've asked. So if you have anything, really don't hesitate, just pop it in there, and Jeremy will make sure that we get to it. I've got a couple of great people joining me today for this conversation on cybersecurity. The first person I'd like to introduce to you is Jesse Roberts, as you can see from the slide on the screen. And by the way, I should say too, if you have not yet maximized your video window, do that, because that's where all this is going to happen. We're going to do this all on video. There's really virtually no slideware involved in this. So it's meant to just be a conversation. So Jesse is from Compass IT Compliance. Why don't you tell us a little about yourself, bud?
Sure thing. Make sure you have the full video. You can't miss out on this beautifulness, right? That's the number one thing. I mean, this is no accident, people. Okay. By the way, so like Todd was saying, I'm Jesse Roberts, Vice President of IT Security at Compass IT Compliance. I'm also a adjunct professor at the New England Institute of Technology. My experience has been, I've been dealing with computer systems, believe it or not, since the mid-90s, right? And I joined the military. I was in the Marines, and I did a lot of computer system setup, network setups in the Marines in support of Operation Iraqi Freedom. So that's kind of where my computer career really kind of got a kickstart. I got out, I worked a bunch of different various jobs, and then, cybersecurity started becoming a thing. And I really just started doing a lot of different research for myself on different cybersecurity topics and issues and things like that. And I just kind of really built my skill set up on myself, and I started doing work in the cybersecurity field. And that's kind of where I'm at now. I still teach cybersecurity. It's one of my favorite subjects, especially when it comes to showing, students and just other people ethical hacking, penetration testing, and, the damage that can actually be done as a result of those types of attacks. So I'm always researching, looking up, reading different articles, and trying to think of new issues. And that's pretty much short synopsis of it all.
Thank you very much, and thank you for taking the time to have this conversation with us, Jesse. I know everyone on the call appreciates it. So that takes us to Dan Andrea. Dan, you are with KLR. Tell us a little about you and a little about KLR.
Sure. Good afternoon, everyone. As Todd indicated, I'm a partner with KLR. Whoa. And first of all, I apologize if you don't have your sunglasses on off the top of my head. The lighting is not very favorable, but I'm a partner involved with the information security group of KLR. KLR is a large New England-based public accounting and business consulting firm, one of the largest firms outside of the Big Four. Our group specializes in doing IT audits. We've got the two technology guys above me on the windows. I'm the auditor, so that's why I'm dressed in a suit, because we just can't not be auditors and dress in suits. So We focus on helping small and middle-sized organizations with their IT audit needs, their control needs. We'll advise and consult. I've been doing IT audits, Jesse said the mid-90s. I go back to the early 80s, so and my head's a dead giveaway on that. So I'm really looking forward to the topic. I go back to auditing IBM mainframes in quote-unquote data centers, original distributed processing, and some of the issues that we had back then we have now. And hopefully the next hour or so we'll be able to talk to you about what we see in the market happening with the pandemic and what its potential impact is in the future. So with that, Mr. Todd, I'll turn it back to you.
Awesome. Well, so, there's a whole bunch of people. I'm looking at the attendee list right now. There's a lot of people that have joined us to have this conversation. Just so that I can put us all on the same page, attendees and you guys alike. The conversation today is that we've got something very unique that's happened in the last 6 weeks. And it's, certainly everybody everywhere is very keenly aware of the lifestyle impacts that COVID has had. But I don't know that everybody is thinking really about the cybersecurity impacts. And we're all, as business owners and business professionals, trying to figure out, what the world is going to look like. I've been participating in, I don't know how many webinars, but it's been a lot that I've been speaking in and sitting in on. I did one last week called Thinking Our Way to Next that was all about, what do we think leadership looks like in the future in the next 24 months as we all try to figure out new ways to work and new ways to collaborate. So, what I think about when I think about cybersecurity is that we went from a workforce that was largely centralized for the most part. People were in their offices to a workforce in this country that was almost entirely remote. And we did it in the space of about a week and a half. I mean, it was like a 7 or 8 business day window and the whole world changed. And almost every company had some kind of technology for people to be able to work remotely, but a lot of companies were scrambling to figure it out. And certainly, even if they had the technology, they never used it at the scale that they are using it now. And so, there's a lot of things about that kind of sudden sort of crash response to an emergency that make the circumstances that we're all working in from a security point of view very, very unique. So I thought we would kind of tackle this topic today from a few different angles. And the first one was, just sort of talking about what is unique about the risk that we have in this event. So I'm going to kind of, Jesse, if you don't mind, I'll pick on you for a second. As opposed to just having a deliberately planned employee that's working, remotely, either temporarily or permanently, what in your mind is different about this set of circumstances?
Well, yeah, again, so we were all suddenly thrust into this scenario where, it's either work from home or the business dies, right? Essentially. So, like you're saying, there wasn't a whole lot of planning really kind of put into place. Maybe they didn't kind of have, the equipment to send home with that user. So one of the things that I know for a fact, actually my mother, her employer was like, oh, do you have a computer at home? You can just work from your computer at home. And I'm just like, that's crazy. And the industry that she's in, it's in healthcare. And I'm like, so you're saying you want your remote worker to not only, make a connection into the healthcare systems, but you want them to use their older computer without knowing anything about their home computer. So that was for me, that was like, wow, that's insane, right? Because they didn't have a plan in place to support this remote workforce. So that's one of the things that immediately kind of popped into my mind. And then also the other thing would be if they did have equipment for you to send home and, the person's bringing this equipment home, they're setting it up without really any good direction set. And then what also is getting attached to that business owned equipment, right? Like, is there any checks and balances in place? Like, how many different devices does the individual have on their home network? Are they cheap, pet cams, right? That are from China that have known hacks because, you get them cheap, $10, right? But that's because somebody from China is spying over your shoulder on you every second, right? So how does that integration with business equipment where it wasn't there before, how does that integrate with different IoT devices, right, on somebody's home network? It was my first initial thoughts.
It's an interesting thought, the idea that you might actually have like a surveillance system at home that's potentially compromised, and now you've got work data and work assets that are trafficking on that same network. Dan, what do you think? What's unique about this in your mind?
Well, Jesse touched upon a bunch of points, just leveraging the whole dynamic of working at home. It introduces a whole new spectrum on the issues of privacy and data security. When we audit, we go in and we look for various policies and procedures relative to remote access, et cetera, acceptable use. And quite frankly, more often than not, they're paid lip service. But now from an organizational standpoint, those policies are coming to life. And we're, hopefully, as we'll see when we get out of this, is that there's not too many violations of those policies. The other thing, it was inevitable, right? We're all experiencing phishing attacks, but that first week, if you guys think back, I'm sure you've got clients that experienced it. The amount of phishing attacks that were preying on people and their health, call this number or respond to this. So I think, we've done a good job from a society perspective in catching up with phishing expeditions, but a whole new wave came out and preyed on people's fears. So, I think sometimes the lessons that we've been taught, we sort of cast aside because of the fear that's inherent in this pandemic. The other thing, again, oh, go ahead, Todd. Sorry. No,
it's fine. I'm making notes as you guys are going here. I don't know if not much planning, use of home computers, whether or not the nature of the home network is actually appropriate for having business data flowing around on them. I made a note, Dan, around your comment called ill-fitting policy. So policy that we built for, quote unquote, remote workers that we kind of paid lip service to. We never really thought it out. And now we're trying to enforce something that maybe never worked in the first place, and then an increase in human-centered attacks. Let me ask you a question. Do you guys believe that sending everybody home, including people's spouses and significant others and their children, all at the same time changes the security profile and the risk attached to all of this?
Oh, absolutely, without question. Jesse's more on the technical side than I, but just think about all those, different endpoints that are now exposed for vulnerabilities. One thing out of necessity a couple of years ago is that in my home office, I segmented our networks because of all the IoT devices, and whether it's Netflix, smartphones, what have you. So we set up network segmentation so that only I have one access out, and then the family can use the other access, and they don't even know my access. So, but I would hazard to guess not many people have been able to do stuff like that in the short term. It's just not something you think about. So yeah, when we look at IT security, we look at endpoints, right, Jesse? And where's your exposure? And adding 5 or 6 different people in a room, notwithstanding the fact that you're getting claustrophobia, but just the exponential impact of vulnerability is incredible.
Hey,
right.
Jesse, if we were at a live event and there were all these people that are on this webinar sitting in an audience, and we said, raise your hand if you've implemented network segmentation at home to secure business data on your home network, how many hands go up?
Maybe one, and it's going to be one of the IT guys. Yeah, maybe Dan. There you go. Yeah, that's all great points. I mean, a lot of people don't know how to implement that type of thing, and again, going back to it, it's home, not an office, right? I kind of also think about depending on the type of industry you're in too, right? Like if you're a healthcare billing administrator, or like even like some type of remote nurse now, like I don't even know if that's really a thing, or a doctor. Actually, my doctor's office is full. He's doing fully online consultation, right? But if he's in a shared space, a shared household, how private is my health information now that he's on the phone and he's pulling out my medical records, and then there's somebody that comes by the kitchen, right? And they look at it on the screen and he's seeing, all the medical history I have, that's your privacy's right out the door there.
So I'll give you 3 very good examples real quickly on that front. Yeah, is that Jeremy I just heard?
Yeah, let me just jump in with a question if you don't mind.
Yeah, please.
Someone on the line asked, Regarding weaknesses in home networks, if we're using a VPN with dual factor authentication to connect to our office network, is that adequate protection, or would there still be vulnerabilities?
So go ahead,
Yeah,
Jesse, actually.
I was gonna
go
say-
for it.
I was going to say it really depends on other factors, right? Is that VPN, is that machine provided to you by the company, right? That's one check, right? To make sure it has all the proper antivirus and things like that. The other thing you have to really look at is how is that VPN configured, right? There's primarily two types of technology when you're dealing with VPN. That's split tunneling and full tunneling, right? To prefer with split tunneling, like a lot of businesses rolled out split tunneling because what ends up happening is you use your own internet bandwidth when you're going to web surfing, other things like that, right? Meaning that you could also still print to your local printer. You can have access to other resources on your network. So if it's in a split tunneling configuration, which believe it or not, a lot of businesses deployed that first because again, you're not sucking up the corporate's bandwidth, then it's not sufficient, right? It's really not. You're actually introducing more of a problem into, Todd's got that awesome diagram going. You introduce more problems, potential problems for your business network when it's set up in that way. If you have a full tunnel VPN, meaning that as soon as you kick that VPN off, all traffic is going right to your corporate network and you don't have any access to any local resources, that puts you in a good position. But I'll also ask, when is that VPN connection initialized, right? Is it initialized before you log into the machine? Is it set up to automatically do that? There's lots of different VPN softwares that could do that, but you still have a little bit of a risk, even if it's not that way. Your business computer is sitting on a home local network still, if you're not on that VPN until you make that VPN connection.
Yeah, so just, for those of you that are on the line that are business professionals and are not IT people, what we're really saying is there's two ways you can have a VPN. You can either have a VPN where 100% of all traffic from the moment the VPN is established goes straight to the destination you want it to go to, and I would argue that that's probably the rarer of the two configurations. Or the other option is what you're seeing on the screen. This is called a split VPN, where I'm connected both to my home network, where maybe I've got my webcam that Dan installed in his house all over the place, I guess. I'm teasing you, Dan. So I got my hacked webcam on this home network, and my PC can still talk to that, even though I have a VPN going to my office. So the answer to the question is that, yes, there is still potentially vulnerability there. There's still potentially risk there. So I'm going to add one last comment, and then we'll to the last topic, and then we'll move on one point here. Let me just real quickly wipe this out. Go back to my other slide. There we go. Okay, so we were talking about it's home, not an office. One of the things, I was about to give you 3 quick case studies of things that I've encountered in the last 2 weeks, and this is just the last 2 weeks. I had an employee of a customer call me who is someone that, over 20 years working for this account, I was in there a lot. I became friendly with them. They had a number directly for me. I got a call, and the conversation was this. My company gave me a laptop to bring home to do work. It's the best machine we have in the house. We didn't really have another good laptop. The school sent my kid home. She really needed to do some research. I let her use the company laptop, and now I think there's a virus on it. Can you fix it but not tell my boss? That's a thing that happened. I have a colleague, well, a friend, not a colleague, but a friend who is a teacher here in Rhode Island. He's a young guy. He has 4 roommates. They're a lot of fun. There's nothing better than going to a bonfire and having a beer with those guys. They're a blast. I don't know that I would trust any of them to handle my kid's sensitive data. His school sent him home as a teacher, and he called me up and said, I think I have a problem. And I said, what's the matter? And he said, well, I was on a call, and I was in a very sensitive conversation with a parent about a behavioral issue with this child, and one of my roommates walked by, and then later, I guess he looked in my door, and later on he said, hey, I know that family. And he's like, what do I do? That's 2 conversations I've had in the last, and both of those were last week. And then the other conversation that I had was with somebody who said, yeah, you know what? My company sent me home with a laptop, and the screen on the laptop is this big. My home computer has 2 giant flat panels on it, and it's so much easier to work from. I can't connect my laptop to it. So I've just been copying data from a thumb drive from the laptop that the company gave me onto my home computer, and I create most of my stuff there anyway, and I just email it from my Google account over to the office computer. So these are the things that when I started the conversation asking the question, what is unique to this event? Those are all great examples. Everything that you see on the screen that Dan and that Jesse were talking about, these issues that employees have, because we didn't send them to a pre-planned home office. We said, sorry guys, chain on the door, you can't come in. Everybody go home with your kids, with your spouses, with your roommates and your significant others, and you're all just gonna work out of your living rooms in public spaces, maybe on shared devices. I do have at least 2 clients that had some employees that didn't have computers at home and literally unplugged like physical PCs and drove them home to people's houses, which is, you know, how the Veterans Affairs breach occurred. Was somebody did something like that, and a machine got stolen out of a car while it was in transit. You know, let's not forget too that another very unique thing is, you know, I'll ask you guys, Dan and Jesse, have you guys been on more than one Teams meeting, Skype meeting, Zoom meeting where files were shared?
Absolutely. I mean, you can't escape it. You can't escape it.
Yeah.
I mean, now we're in a situation now, I mean, working remote, certainly from in my profession, well, we're doing a lot of stuff remotely and we're online with clients sharing screens of, you know, we don't need to get into too much detail, but let's just say of their password policies of who has access to what. We're looking at firewall configs, you name it. And if you're not careful with how you configure these meeting sites, as everybody's, I'm sure, familiar with what went on with Zoom, it's very possible to have screen scrapes or other even more nefarious types of things happen.
Yeah, so, you know, I mean, it is absolutely the case that, you know, there have been major compromises with Zoom. I have more companies that I'm talking to right now that were not clients of Envision before this event that are calling me up and saying, hey, the horse is kind of out of the barn. We started using Teams. Everybody everywhere has it. People are dumping files into it. It's on people's phones. We have no visibility or control to that data. I would argue that right now, at this moment in history, cybersecurity in our country is at the single worst point it's ever been because of the events in the last 6 weeks. I just don't think that the scale of it is really truly understood yet. And I wholesale expect, you know, I'm recording this, so later on you guys can play it back at me and be like, you were wrong, or I'll play it to you and say, I told you so. I wholesale expect that in the coming 2 years, we're going to learn about significant losses of data, significant breaches of private information that happened during this window of time. And that whole ends justify the means. You know, it's extraordinary circumstances, extraordinary times call for extraordinary measures. This is the language we use to make it okay to violate good practice when it comes to cybersecurity.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Jess.
Well, I was just going to kind of say, and going kind of with that, what you're saying there, Todd, is that basically, especially if you think about, I kind of was thinking about too, like what if somebody was, you know, hey, they're using their own, bring your own device, right? Their own asset to conduct, you know, company business, right?
Yep.
And all of a sudden, what if you as the business owner or there's some sort of issue with that employee and then you decide to cut ties with them? How do you know that your business data isn't sitting there on their PC and what kind of legal recourse do you have to actually go, hey, no, we're going to have to pull that asset in? Or because I can think of instances in the past where there's been like, I'm thinking specifically about peer-to-peer file sharing, where there's been incidents where they wanted to prosecute somebody, but since the asset where it was done was technically somebody's work PC, that they'd have to go after the company and not the individual, and it wasn't worth going after the company.
Well, you know, it's a perfect segue, because the next thing that I really want to talk about is how we measure the risk that we've now inherited. Because I think what I'm seeing in the notes from this page and the split VPN question, which, by the way, I don't know who asked that. Awesome question. And you guys feel free to do that more. I love it. You know, I think there's a question, and there's a reason that I picked out, by the way, the people that are on this call. I've got Dan, he's an auditor, he's in the audit business. I've got Jesse, who is a cybersecurity expert and an ethical hacker. Envision is in the business of building infrastructure and designing business process and workflow automation. And we focus a lot on human-centered design and technology. You know, when I think about this, in my mind, the damage is already done. It's happened. There's a massive problem now that we need to clean up. And so as an auditor, Dan, I guess, let me ask you, I got 3 for you. You know, is there even a way to audit this after the fact? Is this even possible?
Audit it after the fact. I would hazard to guess, I'll leave it to the technology guys. I don't know if auditing after the fact is going to provide anything other than lessons learned. Okay, so we've gone through this 6-week scenario. And I will echo what you're talking about, Todd. We're going to find out, I mean, what's the anatomy of a breach, right? There's initial infiltration and there's surveillance going on. Guaranteed there's surveillance going on right now. Hopefully not in anybody that's watching us, but guaranteed there's surveillance going on and it's going to rear its ugly head. So, you know, as far as a lesson learned, maybe when we come back to some sense of normalcy, you can do some type of diagnostic or forensics on your internal systems to make sure there was nothing out of the ordinary. And there's certainly tools, and I know Jesse's company does stuff like that. The bigger concern is, from a lessons learned standpoint, is how do we take that forward? When we go into companies, we look at their risk assessment. We look at what they do from a risk assessment. I better see, when I start auditing my clients now, that the risk register has been updated for these types of events, and what type of procedures, what type of mitigating controls, things of that nature have you taken. You're also going to see a renewed emphasis on vendor risk management. Okay. You know, it's not speaking of the present company, but, you know, there's a lot of time third parties to help them out in situations like this, to set up a VPN or to do whatever. What are the controls on those vendors? We always have been worrying about that, and it's not just now, it's been a couple of years going on in our emphasis on vendor risk management. So I would say it's more of a what do we learn and how can we apply those lessons forward, like you would in an incident response plan or something like that.
So can I ask you a follow-on question to that? Because you kind of touched on something that I think is a big deal. I actually work with one company that is implementing a new piece of software, and it's sort of inconsequential, but the way the software looks at user accounts, it treats all groups as a vendor. It thinks that an internal user is a vendor, it thinks that an outside user is a vendor. The reason it thinks of it that way is that they process pieces of information. And so from the software's point of view, a vendor is a vendor is a vendor, whether it's an internal vendor or an external vendor. We're assigning this to someone and having them do work. I had that thought actually about vendor risk management, and I thought to myself, I wonder why it is that we don't, in the industry, more actively turn those policies for vendor risk management and focus them on our own employees. Why are we not requiring employees, before they're having access to systems, to attest to what infrastructure they do have at the moment, whether or not they've done network segmentation? Why is that not a thing?
We certainly have that, or I see it all the time. It really manifests itself in a data handling policy, a data classification policy, where you identify what types of data and who has access, you know, on the theory of least privileges. So I think that's what you're getting at. I mean, everything we do starts out with understanding where your data is, you know. Hopefully we don't have data sitting at home right now. Hopefully we've locked down transmission so that we can't allow downloading of data to local drives. Hopefully we've taken steps so people can't circumvent those controls by emailing to their personal accounts company data. That whole host. So from a risk management standpoint, company should have some type of a data classification, a data sensitivity policy, which structures out what type of data, who has access to it, and then that should sort of drill down, if you will, and funnel down to privileges.
Fair enough. So, Jesse, I'm going to ask you some similar questions about these topics, but with a sort of a hacker techno spin on them. In your opinion, if I came to you and said, Jesse, I have 100 employees. I sent them all home. For better or for worse, we never anticipated this. Some of our employees had company-issued devices. Some of them had home devices. I suspect that some of them didn't like their company-issued device and used their home device anyway. And I have no idea if data's been copied around. I want to try and find the data. Are there tools that I could use to say to my employees, hey guys, you know, I'm glad we got through this, but now we need to make sure that we clean up after ourselves. We'd like you all to run this thing or allow Jesse to do this so that we can try and make sure that we've reined in all of that extra stuff that got out there.
There's definitely a whole bunch of different tools available out there. Some free, some not so free. Usually the free ones come with certain conditions and they're not as efficient, right? But yeah, absolutely. There's types of tools out there that'll go look for patterns, credit card numbers, social security numbers. It depends on whatever your data is classified as, right? So if like Dan was going back to what Dan's saying is you got to have classification of what your data looks like before you really know how to look for it, right? So there's definitely a plethora of tools. I know. I'm sure, Todd, like your company has like a preferred tool set vendor you work with. And again, there's just so many different companies that put this stuff out. It's really about maybe just doing due diligence with data discovery. You know, I always refer to the Gartner Magic Quadrant when I look at different types of tool sets. That kind of helps me narrow things down. There's also free stuff. Like if your company isn't like can't spend a whole bunch of money, get on GitHub, right, and do search for different types of software. I guarantee somebody's wrote something out there, right, and just send somebody a task to learn it. But that in itself might, introduce some kind of level of risk if you don't know what the software is that you're actually running. So, keep that in mind as well.
I'm going to ask you the question that I know that there's got to be at least one IT director on the call that's dying for someone to ask this. So what's more expensive in your mind, the tool that we need to properly discover the data that's gotten lost, or the subsequent lawsuit when we've lost some confidential data?
I mean, we know all the answer to that, right? Obviously, the lawsuit and the
forget the lawsuit, but reputation loss, which is huge.
Reputation, yeah.
Oh, geez, yeah, absolutely true. Trust is absolutely a currency right now, and I don't think I think it's going to be even more emphasized. Following this event. That's a really astute point, Dan. I asked the obvious question because I think it's important that everybody on the call hears that thought, because I get that we are, I am a business owner, and when this all started, I absolutely was, looking at our pipeline and our financials and our accounts receivable and thinking about, okay, what percentage of the customers that I'm serving aren't going to be here 6 months from now? How much am I going to get stuck with in receivables? Like every company and every business owner everywhere, I became very focused on cash planning and cash management. But I do think that is where the saying, penny wise and pound foolish, came from. I think that following this event, there are investments that need to be made to go back and retroactively discover what you don't know. Identify the data that's been disseminated and get it back under control. And then you need guys like Dan to come in and help you figure out what is the right remote work, distributed workforce, agile worker policy and process and training that's going to prevent this from happening again. Almost everybody on this call has been watching the news, I'm sure. Maybe there's somebody on there that's dug their head in the sand, but I doubt it. We've all heard the language of a second wave of possible event related just to COVID alone. And that's COVID. And let's not forget, folks, that this thing isn't even an airborne virus. If this thing were airborne, this whole situation would be immeasurably, exponentially worse than it is. And, I hate to sound like the harbinger of doom in any way, but, it was 2 years ago that we had a movie event that was around business continuity. And one of the things that we talked about in that event was we said everybody thinks business continuity. They think blizzard, they think terrorist attack, they think flood or fire. What about pandemic illness? And we spent 20 minutes talking about that. And so my message to everybody is, listen, we are going to get through this unquestionably. And I have a great deal of confidence in human resiliency. But I also know that as bad as this has been, just by saying the word airborne, it could have been much, much, much worse. So we need to be prepared for the future. We need good policy and procedure. So that kind of transitions us into the next thought, which is, what kinds of human issues and policies should we be considering? I think about a lot of this stuff when I consider cybersecurity even before this event, but I'll throw some buzzwords out there that are in my head, and then I'll give you guys a minute to pontificate on that. The language I use at Envision with our clients and with prospects and with nonprofits that I sit on the board of is culture of shared responsibility. For a long time, data security and IT security was considered the job of the IT department. And I've never thought that was appropriate. I think it is a shared responsibility that we all have. We have to protect each other. And so we talk about things like absolute amnesty for self-reporting of breaches. We talk about, what can you do when you have repeat offenders and you've been testing and, through no fault of their own, somebody just keeps clicking the link, even though we send that link over and over again. What can we do about users' home environments? So let's kind of start at the top of that list. Absolute amnesty. The idea behind absolute amnesty is your employee clicks a link they shouldn't have clicked, or infects a computer they shouldn't have infected, or loans their computer to their kid to do this thing and accidentally creates the virus. The employee that called me because that person is not completely convinced that they won't lose their job if their boss finds out, because their company does not have an absolute amnesty policy. How do you guys feel about absolute amnesty? Is that a good idea or a bad idea?
I'll go first. I think it's a great idea. Look, I mean, nothing angers me more in my 20 plus years of doing this stuff when somebody goes, I didn't click on anything, I didn't do anything. I'm just like, it just didn't magically happen. The computer for the most part does what it tells you to do or does what it's instructed to do. So nothing makes me, if you tell me what happened, it's going to be a lot easier for me to fix, me to address that potential hack. It just ends up being a lot easier, whoever's handling that incident's end, right? Like if you go, to be honest, I was, my daughter, she had the school project and she was looking for images, and we clicked on this EXE that said all Statue of Liberty images popped here. I didn't know. And then all of a sudden we started getting all these pop-ups, and we're like, okay, great. Thank you so much for being honest. Let's get this issue fixed, and let's have a plan in place to make sure your machine, if it can't be recovered, we get you something new. And that's something else I think that we should probably address too, is what do you do when there is an issue? Do you have a backup? What if, do you have a backup machine ready to ship to that person, right? I think that's something like Todd saying, we're in this now, but it might get worse, and you have to also kind of plan for the future too. Like if you're not planning for that stuff now, off the call, you should absolutely do that, right? So I'm for amnesty. Yeah, put me in the amnesty.
Oh, Dan, I'm dying. I think that's a sense, Dan. I'm dying. You gotta tell me. What do you think, buddy?
Well, I was laughing at your T account there. So any accountants out there will recognize that T account there for the amnesty. Well, I mean, you could tell by my forehead that I grew up as a spare the rod, spoil the child type of guy. So I would answer your question. No, don't put me in that side yet, young man.
Okay.
I would answer your question that, is this a repeat offender time, right? And do I have a sanction policy in place? Because absolutely, everybody makes mistakes. And I will argue that I've softened over the last couple of years as we've seen, as people undergo more and more regular phishing training, that we're starting to see positive reinforcement for the people that take security to heart works better than negative reinforcement reinforcement for those people that aren't doing their job. So I think, you know, Todd, your question, if it's a repeat offender, then I would point to my sanction policy, and everyone should have a sanctions policy, especially of those that might be watching that are either business associates or deal remotely with the healthcare field, because the sanction policy is required. I would look to my sanction policy, and if it's a first-time offender, yeah, I'm willing, and then I would redouble education. But if it's a repeat offender, there's something more going on. So you can put me right in the middle. That's it.
All right. Cool.
No, 0.25 on amnesty, just to make your day.
Okay, sure, we'll do that. We'll 0.25, and then I.
But again, I want
to.
I do want to emphasize that we're seeing a lot of the success of positive reinforcement versus negative reinforcement in our client base, and it's actually taking hold.
Good. Well, so, you know, I'm asking questions. I say it, Jeremy, I'm getting there. So there was a question that was posed. I was just about to say, let's take a break for a second. I'm going to answer a question, but just so that everybody on the webinar is aware, the way that I think about this and the way that I kind of run these kind of Q&As is I'm deliberately asking questions that there are no hard and fast answers to. You know, what I want to do is get you guys the opportunity to hear some different perspectives on these issues. And then I want you to go back and go and find your management organizations after this webinar, or if you are the management organization, go and find your operations team and say, hey guys, I heard this interesting conversation today, hopefully it was interesting, and this question was brought up about how do we handle people who expose us to risk and self-report that they may have done that, and how do we handle people that we test and they continually fail the test. We need to think that through as part of our policies going forward. So guys, real quickly, just shifting gears kind of fast here, there was a question that was asked earlier, and the question was, do I think that risk management in general needs to include pandemic planning, and is that going to be included in risk assessments in the future? Dan? What do you think?
I would, well, how does a risk assessment work, right? You identify the potential issues for your organization. You know, we have business recovery plans, we have disaster recovery plans. We also have those plans that incorporate, as part of an event, a pandemic event. Okay, so in the old days when we were first getting into DRs, there was, you know, we classify various events. You know, one of them was a nuclear war. Okay, what do you do in a nuclear war? Well, if there's a nuclear war, you've got more to worry about than getting operations back up and running. But certainly a pandemic should be part, in my opinion, of some type of risk management contingency plan, disaster recovery plan. And when you do your risk management plan, after you identify risks, then you identify the likelihood, what you have for mitigating controls, et cetera, et cetera. And like any risk assessment, it's cost versus benefit. There is a certain amount of residual risk that we're all going to accept, right? You hear, not to belabor what you hear regarding the COVID-19, but there's almost a war going on between we can't protect everybody and the economy is suffering. Okay, so people are starting to sort of play God, for lack of a better term. And you have to accept that piece of residual risk, but you certainly should consider pandemic planning as part of your overall business strategy.
Thank you, Dan. That's very helpful. And thank you for the question. Another really good one. So listen, we've got 15 minutes left, and we're pretty much done with my third topic here, but I do want to ask one or two more little things about that. One of the things that we just talked about a few minutes ago was repeat offenders. So on our scoreboard for amnesty versus sanctions there, it's 2.25 to 0.75 right now. And honestly, I think it's skewed math. And the reason I think it's skewed is because there actually is a very important distinction there. When I talk about absolute amnesty programs, what I'm actually talking about is self-reporting. And so I deliberately didn't say that up front because I wanted to start a little debate. But one of the things that we talk about a lot with customers is, listen, there are going to be three kinds of problem employees you might potentially encounter from a cyber point of view. Those who make mistakes, those who make mistakes and don't know it. Those who make mistakes and try to hide it. those who make mistakes and self-report it, and those that you proactively tested and they repeatedly fail. And maybe they're just bad with technology and it's not something they've ever had to do before, and they just keep clicking that link because they're dying for the coupon. And honestly, at one point I had one company that we were testing that failed so badly that I finally, the last test I sent was a phishing test, and it was an email that went out, and it was a plain email with a big red button in the middle that said, click here to delete your data, and 9 people clicked the button. And so, yeah. So, I think the users that make a mistake and don't know it are always going to be there. The ones who make the mistake and hide it are the ones where, Dan, I'm on your side, on the sanction side of the house. I'm saying, look, if you've made a mistake, you realize it, and you're deliberately concealing it, then I have a problem with that. But I also do have a problem when there are a lot of users like that in an organization, because it says to me that at no point has anybody ever said, we're in this together. And if you volunteer that you think you've made a mistake, or you volunteer that you erred on, that you think you've made a boo-boo here, then we're going to have your back. If you're not saying that to your employees, you're almost guaranteeing that you're going to find yourself having to impose more sanctions and amnesty. And I just wanted to kind of get that comment out of the world. The question I have.
Let me just touch upon that, Todd. So when I talked about the sanction policies earlier, I would hazard to guess, and if there's any attorneys on the line, most policies encourage one way, shape, or form if they see a violation of policy XYZ, right? So in effect, that's your self-reporting. So if the policy says to report something, then how the heck can you apply a sanction against? Follow what I'm saying? So there's some inconsistency there. Better that they adhere to reporting or self-reporting, or if they identify an event. If they do that and the policy encourages them to do that, then I would suggest that, Dan's sanctions may not be applicable, but it's important to point out that sometimes we see those types of inconsistencies.
I'm making you a t-shirt that says Dan's sanctions. That'd be great. All right,
better than a grumpy old man, I guess.
With 2 minutes here, and really let's keep it to 2 minutes. Jesse, you guys are in the business of fish testing people, among other things. What do you guys recommend when you have people that are repeatedly failing tests, and not because they don't care, just because they're maybe not great with IT, and that happens?
Well, so what I'd really recommend is, because a lot of times we put the emphasis on them kind of self-learning, especially when you're doing with these phishing platforms, right? If you have somebody that repeatedly fails and then you're expecting them just to take some computer-based training to actually teach them what the correct thing is to do, it's not going to work, because maybe, like you said, they're just not good with technology. So I would say an extra remediation where you actually have somebody who knows what they're doing actually go down there and sit with them, or maybe sit with a group of them and go, look, no falsies here, but you guys are consistently bad at these email phishing tests. I'm going to show you all the details here. I'm going to walk you through it step by step. We're going to be in it together, and then we're going to run some tests together, and we're going to do it collectively, right? Because when you apply that type of model of learning, it's more likely to take hold than it would be if somebody's just sitting there at a screen going, oh, I don't really know what this means.
You're speaking my language, man. You're speaking my language. It makes me crazy, the number of companies that think they're going to solve for cybersecurity with computer-based training alone. It absolutely is a human discussion, because you know what the hackers are exploiting? They're exploiting human behavior and human flaws. We're flawed individuals. They prey on our fear. They prey on our insecurities. They prey on our lack of awareness. And that's a human issue, and we need to address it with human tools. All right, so in the last 10 minutes here, we've talked now about what we think the risk is. We've talked about what's unique about the risk associated with this COVID event and how we measure that risk after the fact. We've talked about some things we should think about with human policy. I want to talk for a few minutes about really some technology and process. So I'm going to pitch to you guys a scenario, and I'm going to look for you to just give me your thoughts on that scenario. I have believed for a very long time, and I've argued for a long time, this concept. And it's been an uphill discussion, but I think that this event sheds new light on it. I think that when we think about the productivity of our employees and the security of our data, that our IT organizations have to adopt our employees' home networks. We have been deliberately hands-off, and I acknowledge freely that there are laws around this that become sticky and become challenges for us. But I think if we backed away from every challenge we ever encountered, we wouldn't be running businesses. So, I think that the nature of the world right now is such that we need to do three things. We need to, A, consider adopting the technology that our employees have at home and provide them support for their home infrastructure, which typically IT departments shy away from. Number two, I think we need to consider that the device we put at the desk has fundamentally changed. Then that, in fact, when we hire an employee, maybe we don't want to just buy technology for their office, but maybe we also want to invest some money in their technology at home. And third, I believe that things like employee bandwidth programs, similar to how we have employee cell phone programs in some companies, and not every company does that, I think some of those make sense. One of the things we're talking about at Envision is, hey, in a world where we're going to have some permanent distribution of our workforce, do we need as much square footage in the office? And if we weren't going to do that, would we spend that capital instead on ensuring that every employee has a 200 meg symmetrical connection, a docking station, dual monitors, everything that they need to be fully productive and be sitting on a secured, segmented, home environment where there is a updated firewall and updated security infrastructure. That's a very, very big cultural and financial change for businesses. Jesse, what do you think?
I agree with you, Todd, 100% with that. If, to an extent, right? Like, we're not going to adopt, obviously, people's smart TVs, their Xboxes, their iPads, right? But anything that is you're going to have them touch your business systems with, you should absolutely adopt and invest in, meaning their monitors, their laptop, even their keyboards, right? What if it's a bad Bluetooth keyboard that has known hacks in it to where somebody can intercept keystrokes? And on the other side, you do want to have a secure wireless access point, secure router, / firewall combo for them to use, right? I think I told you and Dan the other day when we were talking how I was down in Florida and this device had WEP on it still. And I was just really kind of shocked. I was like, wow, that's crazy. The place my father was staying had a WEP Wi-Fi point. He doesn't even know what that is. So, but again, that type of thing, you should absolutely adopt if you're going to move over to this model where you have to work from home or you might want them to work from home, you should make sure that each one of those devices that your business data will be traversing is in your realm of control and that you can assure some level of security on those devices. And then part of that is paying with internet too. Yeah, absolutely. Bandwidth is a thing. I mean, you can't, if somebody has a really crappy internet connection at home, right? Say if they have like the cheapest possible place, what's to prevent them from saying, hey, neighbor, can I get your Wi-Fi access password to hop on your network and do my business? That happens all the time.
What do you think, Dan?
I think, and forget about the pandemic, I would think that if you are going to allow or encourage a person to work from home, you've got to give them the tools to be able to work efficiently, effectively, and securely. So I guess I'm agreeing with you to some respect. What I would like to see, we're still early in this, right, guys?
Yes.
Who knows what's going to shake out? We're focused on cybersecurity and technology, but let's just factor out that for a second and all the other host of issues that the workforce is going to have to deal with once this goes away. But I absolutely agree that if you're going to allow someone to work from home, then you've got to take responsibility for the security as much as that individual, and whether that's through policies, technologies. I talked earlier about my segmented network. It's incumbent upon both as part of the shared responsibilities that we alluded to earlier. I would say if you, I would say now, and I've been encouraging clients that are not as used to working remotely, is to get IT involved, get their IT group involved, if permissible, just to make sure they've got proper updates on their routers, their firewalls, their operating systems at home if they're using their own computers, and they don't, you know, have that conversation to at least make sure you've got, you know, endpoint protection vis-a-vis antivirus, malware, your firmware is up to date. Just make sure that they've done all of that and help them out that way. But certainly, if we're going to allow this, and it's only going to grow in the future, then we have to take a responsibility to make sure they can work securely. However, if you start talking about imposing some type of how can I say, imposing the corporate will into my private household, don't do that, because I think there's a host of laws that you're going to be violating. So there's a balance, and it goes back to, you know, evaluating the risk and implementing the controls to mitigate the risk. But I would not want to see a scenario where, you know, I'm dating myself, Big Brother is controlling my household.
I think that's a great point as well. So, guys, it's 2:57. I think this has been a fantastic conversation. I can't thank you guys enough for jumping on here and giving us your thoughts and opinions. And I hope everybody on the call doesn't mind me asking somewhat provocative questions about this, especially that last one. I do think, by the way, that we are all, as business professionals, whether you're an employee or a business owner, about to step into a very new world when it comes to where is the border between what is appropriate and even legal for a company to ask you to do and what you allow a company to ask you to do, right? There is, I mean, I've been sitting on calls at the state level and with FEMA and with other organizations, and one of the conversations I heard was, hey, when we have a virus, are we going to be allowed to require people to, I mean, with virus, vaccine, are we going to be allowed to require people to get the vaccine? That's a whole nother kettle of legal fish and things that I'm glad are not my job. So this has been fantastic. If any of you have questions for these guys down the road, KLR can be found at conlitwin.com. You can reach Dan there really at any time. You can reach out to us. We'll be happy to give you contact information for him. Similarly, you can reach Jesse at Compass IT Compliance, compassitc.com. Again, if you'd like his direct contact information, reach out. I'm sure he'd be very happy for me to supply it. If you are interested in continuing the conversation, we're having these kinds of practical chats all the time right now. And next week we've got, actually tomorrow, excuse me, we've got one on pivoting your marketing strategy and your communications during and after the COVID-19 event. You know, in a world where you can't do face-to-face events anymore, how are you going to get your message known and manage your brand? In a week after that, we're doing a really exciting one I cannot wait for on rebuilding your workforce. And we're going to have the HR director from KLR on the conversation, and we're going to have some folks from a leading background screening company here in New England, Creative Services, Inc. And we're going to talk about, now that there are, you know, I think I saw 26 million, I actually haven't looked at it in a couple of days, new unemployed people. How do we go about vetting those employees? What new things do we have to think about in the hiring process around workforce agility to even be attractive as an employer? It's going to be another conversation like this. I'm going to throw questions at them that they're going to say, I don't know if you can do that legally. So there'll probably be some really good thoughts that come out of that. And then, of course, maintaining company culture across a distributed workforce, a topic that's near and dear to my heart. I've been advocating for years that you can build culture digitally, but I will also be very glad to tell you about the things that I've learned that didn't work, even for a company like Envision that's been doing this for years. We've been using Microsoft Teams since the product was first released, and there are things I can tell you that we learned in this event that we thought we knew before this event, and it turned out we were wrong. So if you want to learn what some of those things are, join us on May 14th. And with that, I thank you all for your attendance. Have a great day today. Stay safe, stay healthy.
Bye, everybody. Thank you.